coming up with questions. But I want to introduce Peter Nietzsche, Rutgers Cooperative Extension of Morris County agricultural agent, my colleague out in Morristown, and he's going to introduce the panel of experts and then lead in the discussion, and then we'll have panel questions from around the state. So, Peter?
Well, it's my pleasure to introduce the other panelists that you've already met briefly in the video. Kurt Alstead, our farmer panelist, who farms in Chester, New Jersey, and Morris County, where I work. I've worked with him for many years, a premier grower in our county, and certainly a premier strawberry grower. And Carolyn Meeker, one of his buyers and CSA coordinator for Alstead Farms, who you also saw in the video. And since most of the crops are really the strawberry is grown for direct market, she's a buyer and consumer. So welcome, Carolyn, as well. So how are we going to handle the questions, Nick? Are you going to read them off now?
So I'm going to read them off the screen, since you guys aren't going to be able to see them directly.
Since we know we have questions already.
Yes, yes. And if there's any questions from here, Jeff is just loading that up, and then we'll have, I know we're a little ahead of schedule because it was 10 minutes to actually have all the 3 sites prepare questions for the panels. But I think people were preparing as soon as they were watching, you know. And it could be something as simple as define some of the terms you were using in the video, or if there was something else on the production side. So there we have some of the questions already. So if we want to, we can start with those. How do they handle keeping berries cool while on display?
Guess that's a question for me, right? Yes. So we don't refrigerate the berries when they're on display. We find that part of the farm market experience in terms of marketing is to have a big, broad, open display, picking the berries fresh every single morning. They've got suitable shelf life to withstand the rigors of temperatures throughout the whole day. When it's being marketed, whether it's at the farm store or whether it's at the farm market locations that we do. Obviously, if you're doing a farmer's market, there really isn't any way of refrigerating. So that's why we really concentrate so much on cooling when we harvest and when we store in advance of setting them out for retailing, so that we have that shelf life available to us when we're marketing. And we like big, expansive displays. We'll display on a weekend. There could be a couple hundred quarts on display, and they'll turn over very quickly. We're conscientious about rotation. They're in refrigeration until they go on display, but we do not refrigerate on display. That's something the supermarkets do. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it just doesn't fit what we do.
Anybody here with a question? Then we'll go to Meredith again. What weight plastic is used in the field?
That's a great question. We use 1 mil plastic for most of our vegetable crops. However, because we keep the Plasticulture berries for 2 seasons in a row, we'll use a heavier mill, nothing less than 1.25. We've experimented with 1.5, and we've not felt that it was necessary for the extra expense of using that heavy of plastic. But we do use 1.25 for the strawberries.
And the next question is drip tape suggestions for multi-seasonal use.
For drip tape, we found that all the general application drip tapes that you're using for vegetable production are more than suitable for 2 years in the Plasticulture systems. We found that the tapes might even work a 3rd season. Past 3, they start to degrade, and part of the problem is that thinner tape, rodents can get in there and nibble on it. You get a lot of, you can have some real problems. But 2 seasons with trickle tape, we've never had a problem.
I'm going to, maybe you can repeat the question when I give it to you, because they're barely hearing me because the mic's.
I can do that.
Any issues with the voles? You just mentioned any issues with the voles under the plastic?
So the question is, do we have any issues with voles, rodents underneath plastic? Not as much as you would think, but we also are growing an expansive number of acres. So I think that the pest problems that we experience in terms of animal pests is much different because it can be mitigated over a lot of acreage. If you're growing a small number of strawberries, I think you need to be much more sensitive to squirrels and what they can do, to mice underneath the row cover, moles, and certainly watch what's going on, use appropriate traps or rodenticides to keep them out. And even rabbits, wild rabbits can be a problem as well.
I would add at the research farm we've had voles come in because the plastic is keeping that area warmer, so rodents come in and it does harbor them a little bit, and then we've had fox come in to eat the voles and tear up the plastic. So we have had some issues, and we're a smaller area of the research farm, so like Kurt said, that's probably part of the issue there.
Kurt, what varieties are your mainstay?
So the question is, what varieties are our mainstay? Varieties have really progressed a lot in some respects for matted row. However, the variety selections that we found to be reliable for plasticulture have been quite consistent. And certainly here in the Northeast, Chandler remains the premier variety for plasticulture. We use another variety called Sweet Charlie, which is an earlier variety, about a week earlier than Chandler, sweeter than Chandler, but a smaller berry, and it tends to peter out a little bit quicker. Chandler is very consistent, good sized fruit, produces a lot of fruit, and the flavor is good. I'm not going to, but it's not fantastic, but it's a very good fruit. We're doing some work with Rutgers Scarlet. We've got that in for the second year and are pleased, and we see that has a place. I don't know if its place is going to compete with Chandler. I think it's going to be more complementary. We've tried another variety named Benicia. We weren't real pleased with the results of that variety. And there's some folks who are doing some experimenting with some of the varieties that traditionally were more utilized in matted rows, such as Jewel, with some success. But we found that we don't see a lot of benefit from planting varieties that we can cultivate successfully in matted row in our plasticulture systems. However, there's some growers who are strictly doing plasticulture, and for them, there may be some advantage to using a couple of these other varieties, such as Jewel, in a plasticulture system. We have a question from the audience.
Just as a follow-up, do you have any? Is there any different pricing for the different varieties that you grow? Do you charge differently? Does a plant yield a better fruit that you can get more money out of?
Great question. Do I need to repeat that question? Yeah, I'm repeating questions here. Our participant asked, are we charging different prices for different varieties that we're growing? And strawberries are interesting. They're much different than an apple. Right now it's Honeycrisp season still, and of course, we grow Honeycrisp. We can get a premier price for a Honeycrisp apple as opposed to a Macintosh apple. And it's because people know it. They're familiar with the variety. They like its traits. It's hard for people to identify traits with a strawberry when it's in a container. There's certainly traits that as a grower you come to recognize. One's deeper red than another. One might have a little bit stronger flavor than another. But we've found that it's very hard to differentiate those varieties on display, number one. And number two, most consumers aren't too concerned about what variety they're getting as long as it's a red strawberry and it tastes good. So to answer your question, we do not, and nor do we advertise the variety name. And the reality is there could be a day that we could be picking 4 or 5 different varieties of strawberries at one time because they overlap, and it would really be complicated to try to separate out those varieties. There are certainly times when we have only Chandlers, but then there's times that we could have 5 or 6 different varieties.
Yes.
What variety tastes the best?
So the question is, what varieties taste the best? And of course, that depends a lot upon the consumer, and maybe you should be answering that question. I'll answer first, and then we can go to my cohort here. If you were to ask a lot of old-time farmers and consumers, there's a variety called Early Glow that people would say is the variety that tastes the best. And it's an early variety, as it's suggested by its name. It tends to have a little bit smaller size, and it tends to lose size very quickly. It's still offered by a lot of nurseries for home garden use. It's promoted as a home garden variety, but we haven't grown it commercially now in quite some time because as much as the flavor trait is really fantastic, its size really hinders productive harvesting. It's a small berry. Where a Chandler might be 2 inches across, these guys are 3/4 of an inch across. And so it's a slow picking berry, but it's a good tasting berry. But there's a lot of good tasting varieties out there today. Again, Sweet Charlie is really an excellent tasting berry. There's Cavendish that I think is a very good tasting berry. I think if you were to open up the catalog, we get most of our plants for Madrid Row through Norse Farms up in Massachusetts, and then we use a couple other Walker Brothers and Cube Pack for our Plasticulture rooted cuttings, and they will offer a lot of different varieties that you will find very appealing, that are well suited to the Northeast, and flavor is one of the biggest things. These guys can't produce plants for the Northeast without flavor, because that's the edge we have over Florida and California. I don't know if you have a flavor opinion, but I'd have to tell you the variety first, right?
And I'd say from a consumer standpoint, if you were used to shopping, store and you get a store-bought strawberry versus having, a Jersey fresh strawberry, they all taste amazing. And I'm a little bit more educated in the field than any of my CSA members, and all we get is compliments every time it's strawberry season. So from a consumer standpoint, it's not like Kurt said, with apples, the difference. Tomatoes, the difference on a lot of them. I wouldn't not know. I know that as long as they taste good, that's what's going to make the consumer happy.
And I would also add that I think color is almost equally important, or perhaps even more important to the consumer than flavor. There's a variety, All-Star, that we've grown for many years that tends to have a little bit more of an orange-red color than a deep red color. And that variety has a lot of very positive traits, and it does have good flavor. But if you, by itself, you really wouldn't recognize perhaps how much lighter the red color is, but if you were to put it next to, say, a quart of Early Glow, it's very pale compared to the deep, intense red of an Early Glow. So we still grow it, but when we have it, people say, "Oh, you got the orange berries today," and they recognize there's a late variety idea, which again we like because it extends the season. We're always trying to sneak a few more days into the season, but it doesn't have that deep red color, and I think that the deep red, to many consumers, is more important than the flavor, because first they need to be attracted to buy it, and if they don't buy it, they're never even going to experience the flavor. And you can sample them and you say, "I'll try it," and you'll get some to go, but deep red's important.
There's a question from off-site. You had mentioned about harvesting so early in the morning. Are there any fungal concerns with that?
So the question is, do we have fungal concerns about harvesting early in the morning? Which is a good question, because we've often debated, is it better for the berries to be completely dry and put into the cooler, as opposed to being a little bit wet and cooler? Is dry warmer better than cool wet? What do you do when it's a rainy morning? And so, ultimately, we've concluded that, number one, there's a big difference between rain wet and dew wet, and we certainly seek to avoid rain wet for storage. So if we suspect that there's going to be a really rainy night into a rainy morning, we don't want to pick in the rain if we can help it. So we will pick the night before and keep them in storage dry, because that will be better. Picking in a torrential rainstorm is just a disaster. However, a dew wet is much different. The dew settles more on the leaves than it does the fruit. Certainly they're a little bit damp, but they're not wet. So we find when you're comparing dew wet with temperature and earliness, it's all about getting out there early and getting that fruit in. You think about a typical day in June, it could be for us up north, it could be upper 50s at the break of dawn in the morning, and that means that internal temperature, that berry might be in the 60s, and so that means to get it down to 34, you've got to lose 30 degrees. By 10 o'clock in the morning, you could already be up to 80 degrees if it's a full sun day, and that temperature, the internal temperature of that fruit, is going up really quickly. And taking 30 degrees of temperature out of the fruit's a lot easier than taking 50 degrees of temperature out of the fruit, which is why we want to get that fruit harvested early. There's no question. There's times we've had to go out during the daytime, pick extra berries for the store. You bring in berries on an 85-degree day, and they're just steaming hot, and you can just hear them groaning. And so we really, you heard it in the video. We are early morning berry harvesters. That is the way we've discovered that is the best, most effective means of maintaining shelf life. Get them early and get them cold.
Question about what's the required quality for irrigation water? Is it okay to use a shallow well, or does it need to be drinking water specifications?
We are not using drinking water specification water. That's not to say that it couldn't be, but we're not taking the water out of a drinking well, nor are we testing it. We have a large reservoir farm pond, similar to what you would find on many farms, and then we fill the pond with several wells. And we're certainly conscientious about water quality in terms of artificial items getting in there that would contaminate the water. But there's fish in the pond, and there's frogs hopping in there, and so there's certainly the things that you would find in a normal farm pond. Of course, water testing and third-party audits are all something that's really big in the industry, and surface water may be a concern in the future because maybe we don't want the fish in the pond who are, of course, defecating in the pond, which is in the water, and then getting spread on something that's edible. And so there's a lot of debate whether there needs to be controls, but then people are saying, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to treat the entire pond, and how are you going to treat it, and is that going to be ultimately worse than the small amount of defecation that comes from the fish? Very complex issues. And of course, we've been irrigating with surface water for centuries, but those are some of the real issues that we're facing today in the industry. So bottom line is surface water supplemented with wells, and we don't test for it to be drinking water, but the wells could be. But you need a lot of water.
Ever plant them as an annual?
We have never planted strawberries as an annual. This year we are doing some experimenting. You heard in the video that we're contemplating going to 5-foot spacing with the double rows, which we did. We had a very good strawberry season this year. We felt that perhaps we were taking some matted row out of production. We thought perhaps we didn't replant as many as we needed to with the anticipated growth that we're experiencing in sales. So in June, in the midst of the season, we said maybe we need to try to get one more acre planted, and we were able to source some plants from a nursery, and we said, well, this is the time. Let's move everything down to 5 foot, which is 2.5 square feet per plant, and give it a try. And there were some mixed reviews on whether we would be successful establishing matted row in June as opposed to planting them in late April. And we were really attentive, kept them well irrigated, and they've taken off very, very well. So to that end, can you plant a day neutral strawberry in the spring and plant it harvest it late in the season? Pete probably has more experience with that than I do, and might be able to comment on it, but we've never done it.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of work with day neutrals in that way. There's a few growers that have done that. You've grown some day neutrals.
Yes.
And what most of the growers, the response I've gotten a lot is they can be grown, that system works, they can be grown through Plasticulture, but that second summer harvest comes when a lot of other vegetables and other fruits are being harvested, and the economics of it don't always pan out, the marketing of it don't always pan out. They can make more money on other crops than doing with the day neutrals. As far as the annual, what some growers have done, though, is come back with another crop, a vegetable crop, burn off the strawberries at the end of the harvest season and come back with another crop in order to make money off the plastic and drip irrigation that's in place already. So that's kind of another angle on the annual, or even after the second year if the plastic is still intact.
Well, define day neutral was the question.
Yeah, sorry, day neutral. Most strawberries we know are sensitive to day length, and they initiate flower buds in the fall as the day length gets shorter. There's new breeds of strawberries that are called day neutral that do not need that shortening day length in order to initiate flowers, and so they continually flower. They tend to have a flush of flowers in the spring and harvest in the usual June harvest window, and then slow down in the summer and then come back in the fall and produce more flowers when it cools off a bit.
So we've played with some day neutrals, and a colleague of mine, Norm Schultz, down at Linvilla Orchards south of Philadelphia, has created a really prolific following for his pick your own day neutral strawberries, and has a unique system. Del Val grad, good school. If you want to go to ag school, where your dad went, where I went, and Bruce in the audience went, but you didn't go there. We diverge. But we found that the day neutrals were tough to manage because we couldn't get enough volume to allow people to go in there with confidence to do pick your own. That we would have too many customers, not enough berries, which is a very difficult thing to manage. So then we thought, well, is there the opportunity to grow day neutrals and use them for retail sales? You know, some people always want to get strawberries. And we found that we had no problem selling all the day neutral berries that we could produce, but we found that they were almost a distraction. There weren't enough berries to pick every other day to really make it worthwhile, and that was with a couple acres of berries in. And then we found that it was competing a little bit with some of our other berries. It was blueberry season, it was raspberry season, it was peach season, and it just seemed to throw people off. And we thought, you know what, there very well may be a place for this in some farm operations, but we want to have a defined strawberry season, and then we want to have a defined peach season, we want to have a defined blueberry season. We think that fits better with our local marketing, and so we decided to not pursue anything further with day neutrals. But that's not to say that there's not opportunities out there in day neutrals, and especially if you're looking for a niche crop and you're going to set something up on your street corner, day neutrals may very well fit that type of marketing program.
If you're not harvesting the first year, does that mean you'll have to pick the blossoms off all the plants?
So the question is, if you don't harvest the first year, do you need to pull off blossoms? And the short answer is yes. We do, when we plant new strawberry plants, we do pinch blossoms off of those plants, both matted row and plasticulture. Are we always on top of it as much as we should be? No, but the goal is you want to promote as much vegetative growth as possible. In the matted row, you want to get runners with daughter plants getting rooted as quickly as possible, so you don't want to waste energy producing fruit. You want to use all the energy in that plant to produce runners and daughter plants. The plasticulture is a little bit different. You're not concentrating on runners. You want to form a giant big plant in that row of plastic with your double row system. But again, you want a big plant. You're going to get a much bigger plant by promoting vegetative growth. You're going to promote vegetative growth by not wasting energy producing any fruit. I've been to farms in Florida and California, and there the systems are much different. You know, basically they are producing on annual systems because they don't have the dormant seasons the way we do. The varieties are different. It's very interesting compared to what we do here in the Northeast. And I just wanted to add to that earlier question when somebody asked about the annual growing. We plant a vegetable crop prior to establishing our plasticulture berries in the late summer. So typically we can put in an early sweet corn crop, or we can put in string beans, or we can plant an early season cole crop or greens. Plant, completely harvest, till, and be able to lay plastic and plant berries by the end of July. So we are really focusing on using our ground, multi-cropping. And likewise, when we pull out berries after harvest in June, you better believe that ground's getting rolled right into something else. And it could be a late sweet corn planting. It could be a late planting of peppers or tomatoes. And remember, we're planting sweet corn until almost August 1st. String beans are being planted until September 1st. Today, we planted, multiple thousands of lettuce plants today, and it's at the end of September. So if you're looking at a very comprehensive fruit and vegetable farm, there's a lot of very creative ways you can multi-crop this ground so that you don't, quote unquote, lose the productivity and the economic value of that ground while you're establishing strawberries.
Question on, you had mentioned, in the fact sheet had mentioned about cooling requirements. What are the washing requirements?
Commercially, I would say the washing requirements are don't. We talked about the importance of keeping the berries as dry as possible, and I didn't repeat the question, what are the washing requirements of berries? And we recommend that the consumer wash them before consumption is home. We do not want to get berries wet. We want to keep them dry, and we've never seen that there's any benefit to washing berries prior to putting them out for sale.
We're running a little close on time, so some of these are going to be quick answers maybe, unless someone has a question here.
About pricing, marketing.
So there's a couple in there, but yeah, so we can get into pricing and marketing. What are the yields per acre? And then maybe go into pricing and marketing off of that.
So the question is, what are yields per acre, and then how do we price and market the crop? We've produced as much as 10,000 pounds per acre. I find that price here in the Northeast is more dictated by what consumers will accept. We really don't concern ourselves too much with what the price of a strawberry in the grocery store is from California or Florida, because consumers know that it's a much different product that we're offering. So this year, for instance, we were $3.49 per pound for pick your own, and picked strawberries were $6 a quart. And I would say that the $6, $5.99 a quart price has been a little bit of a ceiling. If you study pricing strategies, you know that you always go with a 9, and you would never do 79 because the consumer doesn't recognize the difference between 79 and 99, so you never stop at 79. If you're going to go up, if you're at 249, you go to 299 because the consumer doesn't differentiate between 69 and 79. You're better off going the extra. Same 19. 19 is a lost number. Never price anything at 19 because the consumer looks at 19 as being synonymous to 29. So you would always go 29, and then you don't use 39. 39 is another no-no. You go to 49, right? So there's these consumer price points, and so you have to think about, so we're at the point where we're at this $5.99. We've been there a few years, and can we get past that consumer price point? It's going to take some doing. I think we can. Of course, inflation might force it, or a $15 minimum wage may force it. But right now we've been hanging at that $5.99.
Two quick questions for Carolyn. If you could define what a CSA is, and then how many quarts would a CSA member expect per week? And for retail, what's an acceptable price per quart, which you just mentioned?
So what is a CSA? The term's called Community Supported Agriculture, and basically the term behind it is, or the definition is, you're supporting farms. So local people will typically buy into a share of a farm, and in return you will get a share of the farm during a season. A way I explain it to all of my new members or anyone that's interested in it, it's a different way of eating. You're eating along with the season. You're eating what's picked that day from the farm. All CSAs, I know just from working with Quart and just knowing some other farms, they all run a little bit different. There's CSAs with farmers that don't have any fruit. What's great about this farm, obviously, in our weekly produce, we get fruit or multiple types of fruit. Typically, and again, every farm works a little different. How this CSA works is there's 3 different sizes: a personal for if you're 1 or 2 people, a half size for 2 to maybe a small family, and then the full size. And they're each done by about weight and size. So it ranges from, I think, 7 to 8 pounds to like 12 to 14 pounds, and then about 25 pounds. So each box will get a different. But during season, I think the small and the medium boxes at least got 1 quart, and I get the large ones, so I was getting 2 to 3 quarts in mine. I think, regardless of your size, as long as the consumer is getting at least 1 size, 1 quart in their CSA, then you're going to have a happy customer.
And I would just add that in May season we were doing 1, 2, 3, right? So a single quart for the for the personal share, 2 quarts and 3 quarts, and then when we got towards the end, we did a pint, 1 quart, 2 quarts. But they love to see the fruit. You know, I think that CSA members want to see a variety of products, and for us, if they're joining ours, CSA, one of the reasons is they do know that we're a fruit grower, and getting fruit is very important to them, and getting fruit that they don't normally see in a grocery store is very important to them. The CSA model is a really great model in terms of consumer buy-in, in terms of getting funding to help support what you're doing, but you really got to follow up and do it well, because you only get that consumer confidence once. You know, it's just like speculative investment. You know, you can get all these people to buy into you once, but if you don't produce, and if you don't give them a good quality product, and if they don't get the variety that they want, if it's not serviced properly, if you're not nice to them, they're never going to come back to you, and you're going to lose them. So there's a lot of responsibility. It's really attractive to get all those members and to have their checks in advance and to have that money in the bank account to get going. But I always tell my team, my niece runs our program, I say, you've got to really produce. These people are investing and really trusting you to do something with their money. And if you don't follow through and do what they expect, you'll never get that second chance. They're going to be someplace else.
So I think we're going to have the last question, unless someone's got something here. Last question for this segment. Then we'll take a quick break, and there's a food safety fact sheet in your handout. And then we'll come back to the panel with food safety questions. But the last one for this segment is on, in a plasticulture system, how do you manage runners? Do you clip them off?
So the question is, do we clip the runners off in a plasticulture system? And the answer is no, but that's not to suggest that it's not better, and Pete could probably answer that. When we were in Florida last year, the Farm Bureau Convention was in Orlando. We went to Plant City and spent a day on a farm out there. They had 100 acres of strawberries, and they were clipping runners when we were there. And but they were also much more prolific plants than I've ever seen growing in the Northeast. So we do not cut runners. Pete, maybe you want to elaborate.
Well, growers use 2 different type of planting materials for plasticulture. They can use dormant plants that are put in usually a little bit earlier in the season, and you'll get more runners out of those plants than the plug plants that they get later in the fall, planted more in the August. In northern New Jersey, about August 15th is our optimal planting date. And they'll produce less, depends on the season, the conditions, the weather. But yes, it benefits the plant to keep more energy in the vegetative part on the plastic in the crown to cut the runners. It's very labor intensive. So it's costly. And the issue with the runners getting into the rows is they become a weed themselves, growing in between sometimes, and can reduce airflow, cause humidity problems and competition that way. So we recommend you do, if you can. If the runner doesn't make it to the soil and stays on the plastic, usually it dies in the winter from the cold. So you can save your time on that one later in the season. But it kind of depends on the year how many runners they produce and the variety, a lot of factors there.
So we're going to save questions from the other sites and ask in the next panel session. We've got a short break now. So why don't we get started with this section. You had the food safety fact sheet in the handouts. Are there any specific questions either here or there on food safety? How about we start? How does Quart handle animal intrusions in the field? Not really food safety, but
Yeah.
we'll go from there.
Well, pests.
Pests.
Right. So the question is, how do we handle animals' intrusion into the fields? We have 9-foot high woven wire deer fencing around all of our farms. So literally hundreds and hundreds of acres. When we're looking for a piece of farmland, we're looking for long-term, the ability to put up animal control and water. Those are the things that we need today. So if we can't fence it and if we don't have water, we don't even want to consider farming it. And so the deer fencing works well for a lot of other intruders, including 2-legged intruders, which sometimes you might need to worry about as well. But the reality is you're going to have smaller varmints getting in. We talked about rabbits, we talked about squirrels, groundhogs. raccoons, depending upon the types of crops you're having, they're going to be a problem. And deer fencing is not going to keep them out. A lot of them burrow, they're going to get in. And it's a real challenge on a small scale because we can lose a little bit along the edge and it's not going to hurt us too much. But if you're growing just 1 acre and you lose 10%, you just lost an awful lot of bottom line. So effectively keeping out these varmints is going to be really important. And you can trap and you can use the little smoke bombs if you can find a burrow for a groundhog. And you certainly need to be diligent about keeping these guys out. You can use dogs to keep them out. There's a lot of creative methods to keep these animal pests out. Any follow-up here? Yes.
Oh, different question.
That's fine. Different question.
Just, I'm curious about water use between the plasticulture and the other method, the matted.
The matted row. The difference in water.
Does it conserve water? Are you using less water with that?
So the question is comparing water usage between matted row and plasticulture. Plasticulture, we have trickle tape underneath the raised bed of plastic. In fact, we run 2 trickle tapes so that there's one with each row. And we use certainly less water with plasticulture than we do with matted row, because in matted row we're using overhead irrigation. So there's a little bit more evaporation. We're putting water out across the entire field as opposed to just in those ribbon rows along where the plants are. Could you put trickle tape down matted row? Yes. Would it be challenging? Absolutely, because if you have trickle tape sitting on the surface, when you go to rotary mow off those plants, one of the things we do is try to mow the plants during renovation as close as possible to the soil surface. And where's that trickle tape lying? If you put down tubing, right on the soil surface. Could you bury the trickle tape and do matted row? Sure, perhaps. But we talked about the fact that getting more than 2 to 3 years is tough with tape. So now you're looking at perhaps a higher gauge mill plastic tubing, which is more expensive. And by the time you expense out the amount of tubing that you would need and what you would need to do to bury it, it may be that overhead is more economical. If you have a shortage of water and you don't have the water resources, then maybe you're going to have to consider that, or just not do matted row, right? It may be that plasticulture is a better alternative because you do have limited water resources. We use overhead irrigation for frost protection on the matted row. We mulch with straw for winter protection in the matted row, and then use the straw to reduce mud in the row centers when people are harvesting in the springtime. And then it also adds a lot of organic matter. In the plasticulture, we use remay, which I think is one of these questions, Nick. When do we use which row cover? We use a floating row cover on the plasticulture berries because we find that the straw doesn't seem to lock in as well on the plastic. It slides and blows off easier. I do know growers who do use straw on plasticulture and do it successfully, but we've always used floating row cover. And the row cover is nice. Row cover accomplishes a couple things with the plasticulture system. It provides for winter protection, but then in the springtime it also provides for earlier warmth so that you can get an earlier crop. Remember, our goal in having plasticulture in our farm is to get earlier strawberries. So the floating row cover helps warm that crop sooner, as does the plastic for the plastic row, and it helps promote an earlier crop. One of the reasons we like complementing matted row with our plasticulture is because we'll keep the straw on the matted row to delay them growing, because we're looking to spread the season out a little bit. So we don't want the matted row to produce early. So we will keep the straw on there longer to keep those plants a little bit dormant a little bit longer so that we can help spread that season out. So we're really pushing hard to get plasticulture early, and we're pushing to keep the matted row delayed. So we're manipulating things, which is a lot of what we do in farming, right? You manipulate to make things work for you. Yes, sir.
Kurt, what are you using for weed control between the rows along the row edge of the plastic and where you insert your strawberries into the plastic itself?
So the question is herbicide program, and I'm going to have Pete help me with this, but there's quite a few products actually that are good for strawberries. However, they require being licensed, right? So if you're a home gardener, these products may not be available to you, but we we've designed our plastic mulch laying machine with a spray rig so that as it forms the bed, just the bed's formed, and then there's about a 10-inch timing where you can apply something on the finished bed before the plastic rolls on top of it. And so we've got little special banding nozzles there so that we can apply a herbicide band on the top of the finished bed before the plastic goes down, so that when the holes are created to plant the plants, which of course then is full of weed seeds, you have a layer of protection for herbicide. Devronol is a really good, old but good product that's available for strawberries. Does require water activation. Sinbar is another old one that's out there. You need to be careful. Brad Majek always used to say, it's a hot product, meaning you can get yourself into trouble with it if you over apply it. But if you surgically apply it, it's a tremendous product. Goal, and there's several new products, and I must confess, I'm not directly involved with the weed control of our berries anymore. And so, but Pete has a guide even that will share that with you. But there's good products out there. And for grass control, there's post-emergence products such as Post that are available. So there's certain things that can be a challenge. Nut sedge is something you want to really have cleaned up. Thistle, although you can use Stinger even for thistle control. Strawberries are a lot easier than a lot of vegetable crops. There are some, but you can get yourself into big trouble real fast too. Oxalis, if you're familiar with oxalis, that's a real son of a gun. You would think it's clover with yellow flowers, and the flowers quickly get these little pointy seed pods, and you tap them with your finger, and pooh, right, you get little pellets, thousands of them going everywhere. And of course, they're planting oxalis in the rest of your strawberry patch. So oxalis is a really tough weed to control. And the reality is, we do a lot of hand cleaning in strawberries. Even with as well as we do with herbicide management for weed control in strawberries, we're always in there cleaning up by hand. Because if you're going to have a nice strawberry patch for consumers, you need to have a clean, attractive strawberry patch.
Well, I think it's a good time to mention that the additional information on our fact sheet that's in your handouts is the Mid-Atlantic Berry Guide. It's produced by multiple experts in the region, edited by Penn State. This is the current one online is 2013-14. I just talked to the editor today. They're working on a newer edition. But with any of the herbicides and any of the pest control, the pesticides, you really want to get the latest information off the web or get it from your local extension office. A lot of details there. The label is the law, so you need to know that some of those details, rates, and things are all in this guide. Tremendous amount of information, detailed information about strawberry production as well as other small fruit. There is also strawberry section of the Mid-Atlantic Commercial Vegetable Production Guide as well, which is on our Cooperative Extension website. This is the 2016 version, so you can avail yourself of that. It's also available as a hard copy in our extension offices. So that has all the detailed information on herbicides, which one's labeled, and we try and keep these materials updated every year because the herbicide, the labels change often every year, so you really want to look at the latest information on that.
What about bird control? Do you do anything for bird control?
So the question is bird control, and that was one of the ones on the board too, so it's good that was asked. And the answer is, we are not doing anything actively for bird control because we've not found that it's a significant enough pest to worry about. However, we do grow high bush blueberries, and we are constantly scratching our heads wondering, are we losing blueberries to the birds, and is it time to put up a netting system, or are consumers just grazing more blueberries than they're paying for, and we're not going to prevent these people from eating the blueberries before they pay for them, even if we put netting up. So it's a real quandary for us. But we do not, when I think about the crops that birds are a problem in, I don't think about strawberries.
We use the big balloon scare eyes.
Right.
We put them up as soon as they're starting to turn green, and we put up a couple dozen of them around the edges.
The comment was using scare devices, and we do get a little bit of bird damage on the smaller research plots, and we'll put up Mylar tape and the balloon scare devices, fake owls. We try and do that right before harvest and move things around. As Kurt said, it's not as bad as crops like blueberries, but we do get some damage on the edge, and we want to protect everything we've got. So
We're going to hold.
Do you use white plastic also as part of season extension?
The question is, do we use white plastic? Not in strawberries. However, the part of the system that we were talking about before with the day neutrals, they're using a combination of white, and then he's also using silver strips on top of black because he doesn't want the heat in the summertime. For us, we want black because, again, we're really pushing to get earlier growth. We want to get strawberries in middle of May if possible. Used to be matted rose strawberries. We were lucky for June 1st, and now we're disappointed if we're not picking berries by May 15th up north where we are. So black plastic, keeping the row cover on are all part of our strategies to get early growth. This year, remember, we had a really early warm weather in March, and everybody's, and we were like, yeah, bring it on, early strawberries. And then, of course, we had that crazy cold weather right after Easter, and we peeked underneath our row cover, and of course, we had a lot of bloom. So we shot out to Pennsylvania, bought another 6 acres of floating row cover, and we double covered all the berries and came through because we had read that the double covering will add another 3 to 4 degrees of protection, and we had a lot of bloom, but we still had a lot of stuff tight. And I think that we had a thermometer underneath the double row, and we did go down into the mid-20s underneath. We were down in the teens outside. So we protected 8 to 10 degrees with a double row cover and had a very good crop of berries.
We did the same thing.
Yeah, so. And there was one other question, Nick, just on the row cover. Somebody asked whether we are putting them right over the plants or using hoops. And we put them right over the plants, and I think that's what most people are doing with strawberries. However, we have seen some issues where sometimes you'll get some threads from the row cover stuck on the edge of the strawberries. If you look at a strawberry carefully where the seeds are, there's little hairs. And so if things are just right, and if you've got, and just right is just wrong in this instance, and you have some frost control that you need to do just as the berries are almost ready, and of course they're not all ripening at the same time. You could have flower buds while you've got a fruit, so you're pulling the row cover over and then you're taking it back off again. Well, some of these little threads from the row cover get caught on the strawberry, then the consumer bites into it and they wonder, what's that thread that's in my tooth? And so that is one of the downsides of the row cover with the Plasticulture system, is that if you've got to cover at the wrong time, which is the right time to cover, but the wrong time from a consumer standpoint, you can get some of these little white threads caught on a strawberry. And we one time bought some in South Jersey before we were in, and they must have had a devil of a time because these things came and just were full of these little white threads. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So, but I've never seen anybody growing strawberries with hoops.
So we're gonna. I have to get in here. We're gonna take a quick break from the panel, but we have there's 2 templates in your handout. One is the a budget template for Fresh Market, and there's also a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. To look at over the next half hour. We'll be back with the panel, but for now, if you can take here as well as remotely, if you can take about 5 minutes to look at that budget template and look at some numbers, put in some, and I'll share one with the panel here so they can answer maybe some questions on the finance and economics, because like as Kurt said earlier, you can grow a bunch of strawberries, but if you can't get them to market and sell them, what's the point? So this is the point. What kind of budget can you work on? I know it's briefly, and we're also going to be providing you the link, because this Penn State publication is an actual interactive PDF that once you start typing in numbers in one column, it shifts numbers on another and adds and deletes as you go. So it's a great tool to use online, but we thought we'd share it at least in paper for this session. So if you want to take about 5 minutes to work on that, and then we'll get back to the panel with some finance and economics questions.
Do they they have this program for other crops?
Yes. Yeah, the question was, did they have that program and template for other crops, and they do.
Are we still live? Do we need to be careful about what we say?
No, I just turned the audio
Okay.
down. I'd like to get a picture of the three of you just while we have a minute.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, and
First, I'll get one sitting and then stand up.
if you could email me that as
Of course,
well,
not a problem.
that would be super.
This over here.
Well, yes, I do. It's just subterfuge to get out of this. But I'm here for it. Okay.
The financier.
We didn't want to keep you.
Everybody needs a financier.
That one where you just get a little bit tighter together.
Oh, my arms around it?
Big group hug.
Group hug, group
No,
hug.
she's
Get up close, please.
She can't just like
Yeah, in fact, I almost forgot about it, Nick. I knew I had something else that I
Well,
was
there-
supposed to do tonight. But,
So it's funny that my colleagues say, oh, Nick, you're MC for tonight. But as I'm changing the timing of things, I get these, Kurt's got a meeting, he's got to go.
well, seems to me that we're not quite done yet, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just, there's no service here. What do you know?
Yeah.
Well, it's a metal room and a metal building and
So
all
I'm
the
gonna
doors are
step to the
closed.
window and I'll just send a text that I'm running late. They're starting without me.
County or?
Fire company.
Oh,
they wouldn't do that.
It's tough to make.
Do we know what some of the other
Good, thank you.
seminars are going to be? I mean, I know cut flowers,
Well,
just don't know, do you have
that's, I
any?
think she.
Do you need water?
Is there another?
Yeah, I probably could use some
So the ones I know for sure, in January will be a winter lettuce.
But you know,
And
your best
in
bet is to
March-
start off small, just as an example.
Having my calendar
Yeah.
pulled up.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
that's in March. So it's January 31st.
Because,
Well, you've got October, which is the cut flowers.
Yeah.
And January 31st is winter lettuce, and March 7th? It's a Tuesday.
It's
Market.
pepper.
Oh, yes, especially peppers.
Okay, March. What was that?
March 7th. November, December are freed up.
I know, I'm like, I have
We
an
have this
acre,
one, we have
what could I
October,
do?
and we have January 31st, and then March
Put some
7th.
money in it. But you know, once you're there.
So, yeah, March 7th is specialty peppers. And then what we're doing with the different dates is a different location will have the live panel.
No, I don't
So
grow
sometimes we'll just be
certain times of
receiving.
year
Be a good business.
that I haven't figured
And other
out.
times we'll be
And
broadcasting. Yeah.
so we moved to this house. It was like pretty much crazy wood.
I may add in some of the economic questions that we have,
My dad hired his friend, came in.
if we don't get anything on the budget side.
Will there be
My husband
any way to
has
know where it's
this
going to be
soccer
broadcast
field.
from?
Ah.
My boss, he'd
So I
really
had
like
this
to
dream
have
of doing like a
don't
10
wanna
by
be
10
there.
Yeah.
fence.
Right.
Well, soccer field.
He's in no rush to do that.
Yeah, no, I have a soccer field. My yard's a soccer field.
Mortontown.
Honestly, my garden's just potatoes. Like I just tomatoes, but it got massacred. With the deer. I haven't. I'm gonna try again.
I don't even know where,
Yeah, because I
does
could,
it even say on this?
No, they-
I
where-
pull
it
into my
doesn't anywhere,
driveway,
but you get
and
your
I'm just like, oh,
tickets. I was just going
square
after that
shape,
other-
that's like my,
both of them. I think
it's
I-
next to the house, that's why I work
You know what I mean?
out.
Like,
There's
I-
hot some plants.
That's a good point.
But for this one, I'll,
And I have
the
my
peppers one, I'm
neighbor
gonna.
that has a garden. She's just built boxes that was her garden.
Where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Her garden, it was like.
Yeah, he'd rather be in the line, what do you think?
So she came to me and I was like, there's a husband side to me. He's like, why don't we build you another one, frame out your area, then put your vegetable garden there, in the boxes, and still use them.
He's like, who are these people? They want 2 years of more tweets.
And then I'll actually take care of it because I work, like, I'm working in that space.
Right, yeah.
I'm actually saying okay to my phone while I'm answering.
Yeah, I was like, what's
I'm being badgered. Both there and
Yeah,
there.
you really can't win. You're the MC, but you've gotten.
I feel like Lester Holt. I'm 2 minutes in and I'm out of control.
Nick, let's not do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's not do that again.
Okay.
Wow.
I know.
It is a 6 to 8 program, people.
We're 2 minutes behind.
Oh, yeah, Nick, you can run as you need to. Except.
Right, except you can.
Except you have to go to ShopRite and buy the same thing.
So that's your
I heard
area.
it once, this guy comes, pulls
Well,
this out, this comes
I have
from
one
out
in there,
stuff,
and then someone had told me, they're like, oh, make a fence with pallets. So then I had
I
the idea
get
of like just
ShopRite
getting
for
a
And
fence,
it's
but
like,
then
well, I'll
that's
tell
where
you
my
what, go
oil
to
came,
ShopRite
so
and get it. Because I already compared prices before I came here.
That's
so I
it,
know
that's
what
where the
production
question, but that,
Yeah.
Joe Fiola
So
has
right
a
now, it's just
strawberry
that
production
area
area?
is filled with purple cabbage.
Yeah.
Is that old? I don't know. Is that current?
Cabbage.
Purple cabbage.
He's written, like, he's got a chapter in a book.
Oh.
He wrote,
We have a,
Yeah,
that's
um,
not a house, we have a small piece of property. We just do raised vegetable gardens.
okay.
It's good.
Well, he would be part of this because he's Maryland anyway now,
Right,
so
because
I don't know if he's got a separate anymore, maybe from Maryland.
But that Mid-Atlantic production guide is
Pretty much covered, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I believe he's the author.
Right.
Harder if they move it. Just post it on the side of the garage.
Oh, I'm not even.
No, we watered it, the kids didn't water it for me.
But,
Right.
they attracted,
Yeah.
but they had Asian vegetables that people were looking for. They had Indian.
I just did too. Thank you. That's no problem.
They did, the people.
They need to know you're alive.
They do. They need to come back direct there.
Okay, we're back. And maybe we're back.
So if you're gonna speak to me.
I should, yeah, that's right, that's right. So, yes, I have to kneel. Okay, so we're back, and hopefully you've had some time to look at that budget template and see, what kind of numbers work best for you. And if you have any questions on the budget template itself or any economics and financing, now's the time to ask those kinds of questions. One question we've seen twice on the screen and once by texting is what would be an appropriate pricing per quart at the retail level of strawberries? So maybe somebody, either from the production side or the marketing side, if you want to handle that question, we can get that started off.
Well, I think there's two different perspectives, correct? What the consumer wants to pay versus what the grower would like to get. I'd love to get $15 per quart for strawberries, and I imagine you'd like to pay less than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think you said before that, yeah, $6.
I think that, yeah, I think the $6 mark is the sweet spot right now. There's, wholesale berries in New Jersey this year were $3.50 a quart or so, $3.75. The idea is that that a retailer wants to double their money, so that would already put that person up to $6.57. And that's why I say I think everything is pushing that retail price to make this next jump beyond $6. I don't know if this is the year that'll happen. I think what will ultimately push the price is if there's a bad crop in California or Florida where strawberry prices are higher. I think that will be the opportunity for us to see prices go up in the Northeast. And then, generally speaking, once the price goes up, it stays up. You think about fuel surcharges. Gas has been cheap for 3 years. You're still paying fuel surcharges on delivery costs, right? Because they got the ability to charge a fuel surcharge, and it's never going to go away. So, but I think $6 is the sweet spot right now.
And I think just to add on that with the CSA is that it's coming in the box. So as a consumer, I don't know what each thing costs. I know that my, giant box of produce, I paid for it all up front. It's an average of, whether it's the smaller box in the 20 range per week, or I'm closer for the larger box, the $40 range per week. I'm not looking at it. I just expect it to be there. But I've also, because I run the CSA, try to educate anyone that comes in is that, part of joining a CSA is that you're eating, one, what's in season, and two, it's based on, the crops that come in. So the consumer, or what I try to educate our CSA members is that it's a farm. You could have a good week or you could have a bad week and whatever's harvested. And they do a great job, but we try to also just educate them. It's not guaranteed every week that you're going to get X.
And what we do with CSAs, a little bit different than selling at the store. CSA customers, when we present them the package, depending on the size share they purchase, they're going to expect things at a greater value than what they would purchase at the store. So for instance, a personal share member has the least amount of discounting. Basically, they're getting the products just slightly below retail cost if they were to price things out. A half share member is realizing a discount of 10 to 15%. Full share member can realize consistently savings of about 25% off of retail. So one of the things we've tried to do is make participating in the CSA attractive through the savings. You know, the investment up front not only gives them the ability to have a direct source of fresh products, local products, right at their door each week, but also a cost savings as well. So then you might ask, well, Kurt, if you're saying the sweet spot for strawberries is $6 and you're taking 25% off, putting it in a CSA, what are the economics of it and how does it work? Well, what I would tell you is there's a lot of overhead costs associated with retailing. And one of them is shrinkage, right? If we have 50 quarts of strawberries on display, people are nibbling on them during the day. Some of them are going to go bad just because they've been out and they didn't sell. CSA, there's very little shrinkage. If we know we need 2,000 quarts for the week for CSA, we pick 2,000 quarts and 2,000 quarts go out and none of them go bad. So you've eliminated shrinkage right off the bat. So that's how you can build in that level of price reduction that benefits your CSA members, that helps your marketing, but it still doesn't hurt your bottom line, right? So you just need to understand the different complexities of pricing and how all these things factor together so that you're earning a profit.
There's a couple of questions about organics. So let's go with, organic production, and would that change the pricing? And then organic controls that you use at the farm.
So the questions about organic and organic controls and organic pricing. We have certified organic production. However, we do not have any certified organic strawberries right now. To grow a certified organic strawberry, you need to have high tunnels, I believe. High tunnels are expensive. High tunnels are another whole complex system. We have some high tunnels, but we've chosen not yet to grow strawberries in the high tunnels because we want to be able to rotate crops through them. So if you were growing organic strawberries, absolutely the price point is higher, and whether the consumer is willing to pay that higher price point is another question. That really is incumbent upon you as a marketer. Consumers always consistently say, yes, I'll pay more for organic, but one of the big problems that larger retailers have is when they put organic lines in their stores, then the people see the price of organic versus the price of non-organic, and they look exactly the same, or sometimes the non-organic looks better than the organic. The consumer says, you know what, I think I'm going to save $5 and I'm going to buy the non-organic because it's more appealing to me and it's cheaper. But there are consumers who want organic, period. And those are marketing opportunities for all of you, especially as you consider niche marketing. But I think it's a mistake to think about organic as being something exclusive from other production methods. And what I've told people for 35 years, when in practicing sustainable practices, we've been using organic practices since I started farming. Just somehow we start to call them something different now in the last 8 to 10 years. For instance, a practice that some would say is organic is crop rotation. Well, we've always done crop rotation. We know that by rotating where we place crops, we're going to eliminate certain pests because they can't thrive or survive with a different type of crop in place. So crop rotation's a real easy one to practice, no matter what system you're using to grow a crop. Another one is site location. If you want to reduce disease pressure, you plant strawberries on high ground that has good airflow, that has good air drainage. That's also going to help with your frost. We talked about being careful about when you pick and not picking when they're extremely wet. But you could put up a high tunnel. If you put up a high tunnel and you keep rainfall off and you trickle irrigate, you want to eliminate disease pressure, eliminate rain. If you eliminate rain in strawberries, you will eliminate 85% of your pest control issues are related to fungal diseases in strawberries here in the Northeast. Put up a high tunnel, you eliminate fungal disease. So there's we can use trap crops. We use soil and water conservation practices, trickle irrigation as opposed to overhead. You know, there's lots of practices that you can do that can help you grow a better strawberry that you don't have to be an organic grower to do. It's just good farming practices. And again, I think it's a real mistake that people try to segregate these practices. I think that there's good practices that need to be incorporated in growing, and you don't need to be one type of farmer or the other to use them.
I would add that Kurt was talking about a high tunnel, which is a hoop house, typically an unheated greenhouse that usually is covered with clear plastic, and you pull up the sides to ventilate it. What some of the researchers are looking at in the region is potentially using low tunnels, a smaller structure, a wire hoop, covered with clear plastic in order to just cover the bed, and potentially use that as a rain shelter to keep the rain off, to keep fungal diseases out. And that might have some potential for organic production. There's a lot of research in the region going on that now. There's some difficulty in implementing that system. It's more structure, there's more cost there, but that might be another method to get organic production out of your plasticulture strawberries.
And we invested in a mini tunnel laying machine 2 years ago because we thought we could, well, we're still experimenting. We think that we can promote earlier growth for tomatoes, peppers, and things. But one of the problems we're finding is that these little greenhouses quickly become hot houses, and they're too hot. And in a high tunnel, you can raise the sides up and quickly ventilate and cool a crop down on a warm May day. But with these little mini tunnels, you can get temperatures. We had a temperature of 100 degrees in there, bang, just like that. And we cooked some tomato plants because we just couldn't get the sides up fast enough. And of course, you need to be able to bury the sides so that the wind doesn't rip them up. And so we're still trying. You know, we used a little layer of remay underneath it on the hoops to try to shade things, and it's slitted so that it'll breathe. And we're still trying to figure it all out. And I'm sure if we're cooking tomatoes, you're cooking strawberry plants, right? 100 degrees underneath that little mini tunnel is going to just cook whatever you're growing in there. So it is a challenge.
So we're sort of switching up the agenda a little bit. One of your handouts was the crop SWOT analysis template. It was a 2-page. It talked about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And on the second page is basically a grid where you can start to fill out different challenges or different strengths, you know, whether opportunities, you need land or you need irrigation, you need better training, you need labor for this early morning harvest, etc. It's a great little tool you can use to start jotting down instead of trying to get completely overwhelmed with the thought of growing strawberries. You can do it step by step and go on this grid and fill it out as best you can to see if this crop or variety is good for you and your farm and your production. Before we get into the last segment, I just wanted to ask one question from Meredith, and if there's any other financial or economic questions, but the one question is, are workers trained on what berries are appropriate to harvest and which ones should be culled?
So the answer is, of course. We field grade these strawberries, so it really is important to have a harvester who understands which berry to pull and which berry to leave. Berries don't ripen all at the same time. In fact, the varieties that we grow here in the Northeast have the stem will come up and produce one berry. That's called your primary, and then 2 stems will come off of that primary stem. Those are called your secondaries, and then each of them will have 2 more. Those are your tertiaries. So as they go, however, they ripen progressively, and they also get smaller in size progressively. And by the time you get to the 4th level, they're pretty small and take a lot of time to pick. So, but that's how you get the same patch to produce for 2 to 3 weeks, because they're producing these berries progressively on the same stem. One of the things that we really are adamant about is white tips. Certain varieties have a tendency to have white tips. They don't ripen as quickly on the tip as they do on the base by the crown. So guys really need to be careful about that. Of course, you need to be careful of any type of damage, either a slug or some type of sunburn perhaps. So they need to be able to inspect that berry. And a good picker isn't squeezing the berry. They're actually taking their fingers around the sides of the stem, pulling against the cap and sort of plucking it off. Because if you squeeze it, you'll cause finger damage. You won't see it right away, but after it's in the container for a few hours out on display, you'll see the bruising. So it's really important to sort of pluck the berry off. And good pickers in good picking conditions can pick 36 quarts an hour. We sort of use 8 quarts an hour as the point where it doesn't pay to pick anymore. We might still allow pick your own people to be in there, but the berries have gone down to a size where, and the quantity of berries that are available for picking are such that it just doesn't pay, because if you're thinking about 8 quarts an hour, and you always have to think on your production size, what are your of wholesale costs? So what's the real value of that berry from the production side of the business? Well, it's basically $3. So that's $24 gross, and you've got $15 to $18 wrapped up in the guy. So how much, then you've got your containers, and you've got refrigeration, everything. So you're really not making anything once you get down to that 8 quart level. And the reality is we say 8, but we always bleed it into 7 or to 6. By the time you fully load the time, mobilizing the men, getting them out to the field, then getting distributed, and then getting out there and picking. So they might produce 8 quarts per hour picking, but the mobilization time reduces it down to about 6. And you see, that's basically break even from a wholesale standpoint. And that's how we cost. When you guys have been looking at these cost sheets. We figure we're all one business, but we always look at our costs on our production side as wholesale or wholesaling to the retail side of the business. So if production can't make it at wholesale costs, then it's time to look at a different crop or moving on.
So before we move on, one quick question, and hopefully it's just a quick answer. The difference between using bare root plugs and dormant crowns.
So we use a bare root dormant crown for all of our matted row. All right, so we get they're harvested in the fall, they're kept in storage at the nursery, and then we get them shipped as soon as we can work ground in the springtime. We're putting in those crowns, and you might see a leaf on them that's dead, and you have to be very careful with the height of the crown in terms of soil level. And that's how we establish our matted row. The plants that we receive in the summertime for the plasticulture are rooted plugs, and they're a transplant, much like you would transplant a tomato or a pepper. They're in size 50 trays, and you pluck it out, and it's got a little peat pot, and it goes into the ground. But you're planting those types of plants in late July, early August. Those things will dry out in hours. So we pre-irrigate the beds, and we have irrigation ready to go. We use water wheel transplanters, and we load the water on. And as soon as we have enough rows down to where we can do one sprinkler run with the overhead, the pipe is moved right into place, and we'll be irrigating while we're still transplanting. We found that getting that water on those newly transplanted strawberries in the summertime is critical to not losing plants. We've only ever done it that way. I did try one time for a couple of years. We were trying to root our own tips, so we were getting shipped these crates of little daughter plants that were bare rooted, and immediately putting them into cells and misting them and everything in our greenhouses. And I very quickly realized that you need to be able to determine as a grower what you can do well and what you can do economically. And even if we can do that well, which we found we were too busy doing other things to do real well, it just wasn't worth it for the cost that you can buy these plugs ready to go. So we love buying them. We've got a couple good growers, and there's good growers here in New Jersey. We source all of our summer berries are sourced here in New Jersey. So there's good growers that you can get plants from.
I want to thank our panel, Kurt, Carolyn, and Pete, and thank our remote locations. We have one last bit of business, and that is an evaluation of our efforts here today. Dan Klaczynski will be coming up in view of the camera and explain this as he's passing out information here in Bridgewater. So thanks again to the panel.
You taking this seat?
I'll take this one.
Okay.
So at each site, there should be evaluations being distributed. So I'd ask that to be done right now. And then I will give a little bit of instruction before the surveys are worked on by the participants. So the survey that you're receiving, there's 2 sheets. The first sheet is what's called an Assent Form. And this is so that Rutgers University is keeping in concert with federal regulation when we do any kind of survey or evaluation. And I want to go over that information very briefly. You can separate that Assent Form from the survey if you'd like. The Assent Form is yours to keep if you so choose. We just want to collect the final completed survey before you leave. The purpose of this information that we're collecting from you is so that we have an idea of how well we did with the programming, what you've learned, what you intend to do with the information that you've been taught this evening, and really to determine the effectiveness of the method that we used today by having this as a multi-site location, but also with the presentations that we had. The responses that you provide on the survey are confidential, meaning that we may take all of the data from this session or all of the sessions we will offer in the future, and we will be reporting that if we do it in any kind of report back to the funding agency, or if we do any kind of a presentation on this program at educational meetings or professional conferences, the data will be in the composite. So no one's individual information will be shared. And all your information will be kept confidential, meaning it is kept with me. I am the sole person who will have access to all of the original surveys that you've completed for us. The other point that I want to make is that your participation is voluntary. There's no risk to you, and by risk we typically mean if we were doing blood sampling, then there's a potential risk, but we're not doing that tonight. We're just asking for your opinion on the program and what you've learned and what you intend to use. And that's going to help us develop future programming and improve the programs that we're offering through this ultra niche crop series. Last thing, as I mentioned, is the copy of the Assent Form is yours to take or keep, or you can discard it if you'd like, but if you could separate that from the survey, we would appreciate that. And then the survey itself, you'll see that it is a double-sided sheet. We'd ask that you try to complete as many of the questions as you can that are appropriate to you. There are 4 questions rather, that are related to the programming, what you've learned and what you intend to do. And the final 2 questions are voluntary. This is information about the number of years you've been farming. If it's 0, that's fine. There's a checkoff box you can put for 0. And then the other question is a gender question so that we can report to USDA the breakup of having female or male participants in the program, because that is the type of information they are interested in, making sure USDA programs are reaching a wide and diverse audience. So I'll ask if you can take the minute to look at the survey and complete it. You can pass those down whatever row you are at your facility, at your site. Nick, I think Meredith at the Eco Complex, and probably Jen Matthews or Jenny Carleo will be collecting them in Cape May. And if there's any questions here in Somerset, I'm happy to answer them, or if there's any other questions, if they can be posted onto the screen, we'll read them off and we'll try to answer them.
Just lots of thank yous to Kurt and Carolyn and Pete from the sites.
So there are lots of thanks put up on the screen for the speakers. We agree. We thank them for their time, and as well as your time for participating. Other than completing the surveys and handing them in, Nick, I think that
would be close of the
business. Close of the session. So thank you all for participating. We greatly appreciate it, and we hope you'll join us for the cut flower production session in October.
Yes.